Welcome to an hour of HealthMade Radio. HealthMade is a community for natural health seekers where we educate people about common health conditions and share extensive research on the most effective natural health treatments and promote legislation that protects our health freedoms. A core concept belief is in the innate intelligence and healing power of the body, and if properly supported spiritually, emotionally, and nutritionally, it can find its way back to health. HealthMade Radio will bring information from integrative health experts throughout the world. Check us out at healthmade.co. Health is what you make it. I'm Dr. Michael Karlfeldt, and I will be your host. Today's guest is Dr. John Harmon. Dr. Harmon has been a doctor of chiropractic for 30 years and is the founder of Clear Mind Center of Idaho. After his own family experienced severe emotional trauma, he became very frustrated with the traditional medical treatments of brain-based disorders and worked to find a more natural way of correction of a brain out of balance. This led him to a highly effective way of retraining the brain through neurofeedback and laser technology. Dr. Harmon is board certified in neurofeedback by the Biofeed Certification International Alliance. He runs a successful center in Meridian, Idaho, focusing on correcting brain dysfunction through rerouting neuropathways and correcting underlying nutritional factors. Dr. Harmon, such an honor to have you on the show today. It seems like more and more children and people are dealing with brain dysfunction. Why do you think that is so?
Well, thank you for having me today, first of all, and good evening. You are right. There are more and more. Seems like when I was a kid, some of these things were unheard of. And part of it has to do with a lot of the toxins that we're exposed to at a very young age. Some of it is, kids they find signs of such things in the womb or shortly after birth. So I don't know that anyone has all of the answers to that, but I do believe that it has to do with a lot of the toxicity that we're exposed to.
Yet it seems like we have such an onslaught now of toxins, of EMF, frequencies, so that it seems like there's so much more now that people are being exposed to than it was when we grew up. Just
in our diets as well.
Yeah.
Look at
Absolutely, the nutritional value of food now versus before. Because I don't remember going through school. I don't remember a lot of children. I mean, they were, boys were being boys, but it wasn't to this level where you're seeing this rate of autism, of ADD, ADHD, dyslexia, OCD that you're seeing now.
Right, and throw in the screens. Screen time develops the wrong part of the brain too early, meaning the left side of the brain, and we have to let kids, infants, be infants and learn how to live in this world, and learn how to read facial expressions and learn how to develop their core strength. Unfortunately, a lot of parents put their children in containers as a babysitter, and they don't let them roll around on the floor. They don't let them try to use their muscles and push themselves off the floor. And then they're looking at screens really early. And that's probably a discussion for another time, but it's very, very important for the first 2 to 3 years of life for that infant to learn how to live in this world and learn how to read mommy's facial expressions and other people around them, and learn how to pay attention. Learn how to develop the side of the brain that does pay attention. That's the right side of the brain.
And because we are growing up and we're thinking that academic knowledge is usually, the more you have of that, the smarter you are. And so you really promote then education through and the use and digital means like screen time, where you try to have the child learn math or English or whatever it may be early, but they're then missing out, like you're saying, on all this neurodevelopment that takes place when you are interacting with individuals directly, when you are rolling on the floor, when you're running out in the forest and you continually have to adjust to the uneven surface and exposed to all these different things that if you are then in a box, in your home, just watching a screen, you don't develop all these neural connections, and your brain actually gets underdeveloped.
Yes, the right side of the brain comes online first, and you only have 2 to 3 years of that being the prime target, if you will, of development. And then once that is over, that first 2 to 3 years, now the left side of the brain takes over, and that's when kids start asking why, because the analytical part of the brain is now online, and the kid wants to learn those things. So it's a big mistake, unfortunately, for parents, and sometimes parents, it's kind of a badge of honor that their child is reading and walking really early, but that's not in the best interest of that child to try to teach them to do those things too early. I tell parents, let your kids crawl as long as they can. If they're not walking by 12 months, that's a little bit delayed, but let them crawl. Actually, your life changes when they learn how to walk anyway, and your life, you have to be a lot more vigilant watching where they're going. So, let that right side of the brain, that's the big muscle movement, it's the attention, it's the creativity, it's the emotional quotient needs to develop first.
So we're seeing now then this generation of all these children. Obviously, they're exposed to the screen time, and they're having then challenges, dealing with depression, anxiety, ADD, ADHD. Are there things that we can do to correct this underdevelopment or lack of neural development that they're missing out on because they did not run out in the forest, they did not do all these things that stimulated all these neural connections?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's a very good question. There are some, and we actually teach parents how to do some of those things with their children. We first need to look at that brain and see if, and we call it the oscillation rate. That's kind of complex if you don't know that big word, but it just means how many impulses per second the brain is working, and they should be working at the same speed. And what you and I were just talking about, the right side of the brain, if the right side of the brain is running slower than the left, these are kids who have a hard time paying attention, have no social skills, don't even look at your eyes when they're talking, when you're talking, because they didn't learn how to read facial expressions. They're looking at your lips because your lips are moving. So these are the autistic and ADHD kids if they have a right side of the brain that is running slower than the left, whereas if it's a left side, this is more dyslexia, reading problems, those types of things. So to answer your question, there's a lot we can do once we find out which side of the brain it is that's running a little bit slower. But in addition to that, as far as depression and anxiety goes, there are two forms of our brain waves that are supposed to have more power on one side compared to the other. And without getting too technical, it's alpha is supposed to be stronger on the right. Beta is supposed to have more power on the left. If beta shifts over to the right side, that's anxiety. That's not supposed to be there. If alpha shifts over to the left side, that's depression. And it almost always happens this way. There's a lot of oxidative stress, and I know you talk about that in your practice. You do a lot of things to help people with oxidative stress. Oxidative stress is free radical damage. You've been under a lot of stress, whether it's emotional or you had some head trauma or you had exposure to toxins. When that happens, the brain, for some reason, it happens the same, no matter what the source was. Beta shifts over to the right, and first the anxiety will show up. If that stays long enough, it chases alpha over to the left, and alpha gets more powerful on the left. That's depression, and I have anxiety and depression. So what we do is we look at those hemispheric things, the right and left brain, the power in the right compared to the left, and then we do the brain map that gives us all of that specific information in addition to the hemispheric exam. We do that the brain map, and that gives us a really good idea of what's going on electrically in that brain, so that we can take steps to fix it.
We're going to take a quick break because I'd love to discuss the brain map a little bit more, because I know it's such a powerful tool to understand what's really going on. You're listening to Health Made Radio. I'm Dr. Michael Karlfeldt. I'm here with Dr. John Harmon, and we are chatting about what you can do to help to correct brain dysfunction. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Health Made Radio. I'm Dr. Michael Karlfeldt. I'm here with Dr. John Harmon, and we're talking about what can be done to correct dysfunctional neural development, and also if the brain is not functioning the way that we would like it. We're dealing with depression, anxiety, insomnia, ADD, ADHD, dyslexia, and the list goes on and on. When the brain is not functioning right, what can really take place? Dr. Harmon, you're talking about a brain map. What is that, and how can that be useful for people to understand what's going on in their brain?
Yeah, we call it a brain map because it's easier than saying a quantitative electroencephalogram.
Yeah, that is easier.
It's the same, it's done in hospitals. We do it here in the office. The brain map's kind of like a weather map. You look at a weather map, you got different colors, and that's what it looks like in the brain. And each portion of the brain waves has its own little map. And green is normal, red is high, different colors, and it tells us how far outside of a normal range that brain is functioning. The goal is to get it to retrain it so that it can regulate itself again. But that's what the brain map does. It helps us see that, and then we know specifically for each person which part has too much activity and which part has too little activity. The outcome or the result of having too much or too little activity in different parts of the brain is pretty predictable. And there are pretty narrow ranges that are well known to cause different symptoms, it's not a personality trait, but it's a way it's expressed in somebody's life, depression or anxiety or OCD or anger or whatever it is. It's because of a brainwave dysfunction.
And you were talking a little bit about like alpha, beta. What is that? Yeah,
there are 4 different ones. One of them is broken down into subparts, but delta is associated with sleep and brain function. Those are detected all over the scalp. They're called global waves, as are theta. Theta come from the part of the brain that's processing emotion and memory. They're called daydreaming waves. Squirrel. Yeah, that's daydreaming is when they're prominent when you're in that la-la land between sleep and awake, but it's memory and emotion. Alpha comes from the part of the brain that is the pacemaker of the brain. It's in and around the thalamus. It's when alpha comes when you're in neutral mode. Everything, all of your systems are up and running and ready to run, I should say, but you're relaxed. That's where alpha comes from. Beta is the one that's called fast focus waves. Those come from the part of the brain that's the thinking part of the brain, the cortex. And they come from very specific parts in the brain. They're local. For example, the place where we process joy is right in the right temporal area. When that fires, it's a very specific spot. The other ones they come from the whole brain because they go, front to back, side to side, communicating back and forth. Beta is the one that shifts over to the right side that causes anxiety, and that's how things start to go down. And there are actually 8 different phases of that when I talked about oxidative stress. And we see different changes happen. So if it stays long enough, then it goes to this phase, and then this one, and then somebody gets in pretty big trouble when you get into those later phases.
So you, in essence, with the brain map, then you can then measure to see what kind of waves are where. Like if it's too much alpha in the wrong location or too much beta, And by looking at that picture, you can then understand why an individual is feeling the way they're feeling, why they're having a hard time concentrating, or they're feeling easily angered, or they say something without thinking. So you can easily see that looking at the brain pattern from the brain map that you measure in the office.
Yes, and we talk in probabilities. We don't diagnose from the brain map. We don't say you are this or you have this, but we do say you have a moderate or high probability of having, anger and control issues, because if a very specific part of beta goes up, and that happens to be 15 to 20 cycles per second, that person will usually have a lot of anger and control issues, whereas beta, if it goes up between 23 and 30, that's more of a hypervigilance, anxiety. I got to watch everything and check everything, and have a hard time relaxing that way. But that is true. Here's an example. Let's say that somebody's delta goes up when they open their eyes. Well, that's supposed to be prominent when you're asleep. So if delta and then theta, daydreaming, if those have more activity when you're awake, and your beta is really low, that comes from the thinking part of the brain. That's ADHD. That's a perfect storm for someone who has ADHD. That's what their brain map looks like.
Yeah, and it's fascinating. I mean, an individual, they recognize the importance of, your computer runs slow and you need to defragment it. Mm-hmm. You need to run all these tests and correct, make sure that it runs at an optimum level. And they don't recognize that the brain functions similarly. I mean, we have all these memory components, and we have all these different components that are communicating with each other on a continual basis. And you need to maximize that communication and make sure that the proper function takes place at the proper time. And that is what you can then find out with the brain map to make sure that the brain is optimized.
And thank you for talking about those components, because there are over 2,000 little hubs in the brain. There are hubs and networks. And sometimes through injury and the things that we talked about, head trauma, chemical trauma, emotional trauma, sometimes those hubs stop talking to each other. Somebody may lose a function and they think maybe I have brain damage or something. But what I do with the functional neurology part is I get those hubs talking to each other again, so that then these different functions can be, the brain can process that, and then the different parts of the body or other thinking parts will then start working again.
Yeah, we're going to take a quick break. You're listening to Health Made Radio. I'm Dr. Michael Karlfeldt. I'm here with Dr. John Harmon, and one of the specialties Dr. Harmon has is to help your brain function at an optimum level, and we're going to discuss how that can be done. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Health Made Radio. I'm Dr. Michael Karlfeldt. I'm here with Dr. John Harmon. So, Dr. Harmon, we've been talking about that we were able then to look at the brain through a brain map. It's kind of like an EEG way of looking at the brain, and then see what areas that are not functioning at an optimum level. So what can be done then to correct that? I mean, you're saying that alpha is in the wrong place and beta is in the wrong place, and that causes this symptom. So what can be done to correct that?
That's a very good question. If you look at what the prescription drugs do, each one of those drugs change some portion or band of our brain waves. Here's an example. Zoloft. It increases our beta, but decreases delta, theta, and alpha. All three of those go down when beta goes up. Problems arise when someone has a situation where maybe one of the delta, theta, or alpha, maybe one of those is already low. Now we're going to push it down lower. That's why there's so many side effects. And I only bring that up to compare it to neurofeedback. Neurofeedback teaches it rewards your brain according to the protocols that are in the computer, rewards your brain for getting into the proper activity mode and deprives it of a reward when it's doing the old pattern. Any brain that's rewarded for an activity will repeat that activity. So the system, when you're hooked up to neurofeedback, the system rewards the brain for doing the right thing and deprives it of a reward when it goes back to the old. Hundreds of times in a 30-minute session. And we actually see on the screen, let's say we're trying to get delta and theta to go down. That's, sleep and the squirrel waves to go down and beta to go up. And we actually see that on the screen during the session. It's really fascinating to see how the brain learns, and we see the tracings go down on the screen on the trend graph. And so prescription drugs and neurofeedback do similar things, except neurofeedback is very specific for what an individual's brain needs in order to function more normally and within normal limits.
So it's kind of like with drugs, and when you're dealing with Xanax or Zoloft or whatever drug you're taking, Prozac, it forces the brain in a direction that is not normal for the brain. So it doesn't really correct the brain in itself, and it doesn't individualize the treatment. It just pushes it in a direction, and hopefully you feel better, but obviously you're shutting down normal brain activity while you're doing it.
Well, and it's artificial. And then, like you said, you stop taking it, and it just goes back the way it was. And the side effects arise because maybe you don't need your theta to go down. It's already down too low. And if it's down too low, then you'll have problems processing emotional and memory things. If theta goes down too low, particularly in the back of the brain, and if in the posterior area, if it goes down, it's a learning and memory problem. And theta is, in general, associated with emotion. So if the whole thing goes low, you're not going to be able to process emotional things.
So obviously the better thing, instead of just kind of do a blanket treatment and hoping, kind of throwing drugs at the brain that suppresses its activity, is to do more of an individualized, or do very targeted, individualized treatment that correct the underlying dysfunction so it can function on its own without having to rely on medication.
That's exactly it. And then, Dr. Karlfeldt, when you're finished with neurofeedback, you have to look at it like your brain's learning how to ride a bike. Once you learn how to ride a bike, you don't have to relearn. We just tell people when they're finished, a brain map in a year, 6 months if you've had some emotional or chemical or physical trauma, and let's see how your brain's doing. But once that brain does that for an entire year, and this is according to MRI studies, for an entire year after neurofeedback sessions are complete, that brain continues to regrow the microstructure to keep that brain in that mode.
So you're actually regrowing brain cells or nerves connections through the neurofeedback. It's actually regrowing and it's changing. The
template is set, and now the brain does the work for even up to a year after you're finished. Now, I years ago read a book called The Brain's Way of Healing. So that brings us to the laser, cold laser. Most of the time when you see laser, you hear that word, you think about a hot laser that burns. Cold lasers actually stimulate different healing pathways, one of which is regeneration. We all lose 9,000 neurons a day because they wear out, and we usually, unless you're doing new things all the time, you're only going to replace 2,500 of them. The laser stimulates regeneration. It decreases inflammation, and it increases cellular communication, all of which are good things for the brain. So part of what we do here is we do that cold laser, also known as low-level laser therapy or photobiomodulation. We do that on the brain before we go into a neurofeedback session to optimize, to get that, to prime that brain to do the best training it can do, because once that laser, when a laser photon hits a cell, it triggers an instant increase in energy, also known as ATP, in those cells, so that they have more energy to train. And that just makes a lot of sense from a scientific standpoint to do that. So we do that here as well.
So it's almost like you prep. I mean, like when you are going to do a sports event, you want to make sure that you fuel your muscles with the nutrients you need to be able to perform and train at the best possible level. So it's almost like the cold laser then does the same thing. It turns on or gives the brain cells the fuel that they need to make the proper changes when they go through a neurofeedback session.
That's a very good analogy. Thank you.
So, are there any side effects with this cold laser, or is it completely harmless? Because obviously, anytime you hear laser, you get scared and think it's going to do something to you.
That's exactly right. Cold lasers were first invented by accident in the former Soviet Union. They were trying to be like those Americans and start burning through tumors, but the laser they made, the only thing it did when they were trying to burn tumors in rats is that it caused the incision sites to heal really quickly. That's how it all started. That was in 1962, I believe. And since that time, they have not found any side effects, and there are zero reports of what they call an adverse event, like something unexpected happened and it caused harm. There are over 1 million treatments of cold laser done per day in the world now, and there are zero side effects reported. I don't know of any other therapy that can have that's had that kind of a clean history in anything.
Yeah, if it would have been a medical drug, at least you would have wanted to kill a few rats, before you were able to say that it's effective, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right.
So when you do when you kind of evaluate to see what's going on in the brain, and I mean, an individual comes in with, they say, I deal with these issues and I need help. I can't sleep, or I can't focus. You do the brain exam. You do the brain map. Are there other exams that come along with it that's important, or is it all based upon the brain map?
Yes, and part of it is that hemispheric exam. That just means hemispheric. Is it right or left? Do they have a left side or a right side deficit? Part of the things we look at the face. The right side of the brain controls the right side of the face, but the left side of the body. Somebody who has a right side weakness is going to have the right eye's a little more open, the left line is shallow, the wrinkles on the forehead are not as prominent as the left. That's just an example. So we do that hemispheric exam, but we do this other exam called a primitive reflex exam, and I've only had 2 people who have actually ever heard of that, but they are so important to make sure that they are not retained beyond the age of 6 months. And I found them in almost 80-year-old people. Let me just give you one example. If the startle response is retained beyond 6 months, it causes chronic anxiety in a person. They don't know why they're all upset. And so that's a very good reason to give why I do a primitive reflex exam. Because if I'm treating someone for anxiety, I better make sure that that anxiety is not coming from a retained primitive reflex, that comes from the primitive brain that's going to affect the outcome of the neurofeedback treatment. So we do that, and we do that primitive reflex exam, and then give that person some exercises and things to do, and the treatment that I do gets the higher brain to then dominate over those primitive reflexes that just occur or are retained a baby is born with them to help them survive, but they shouldn't be there after about 6 months.
Fascinating. We're going to take a quick break. I'm Dr. Michael Karlfeldt. You're listening to Health Made Radio. I'm here with Dr. John Harmon. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Health Made Radio. I'm Dr. Michael Karlfeldt. I'm here with Dr. John Harmon. Dr. Harmon, you're talking about these primitive reflexes and mentioning that if you are retaining them beyond 6 months, it really then changes the maturation. And you're mentioning that even an 80-year-old individual that you've encountered still held on to these primitive reflexes, and that it can really impact an individual's development. So it seems almost like the shedding of a skin, that you need to get rid of those kind of old patterns in order to be able to take the next step. So how does a primitive reflex exam look like? I'm curious.
Okay, the primitive reflexes. There is the rooting reflex that, the baby has to know, how do I get nourishment? So if something touches the cheek or around the lips, then the infant will latch on. That's one. And we do a test in and around the lips, and we stroke it, and we see flinches, or we see the lips move. When that happens, we know that's been retained. That should not happen. There's a startle response. We try to startle. There's a certain procedure we do and see if somebody flinches. If somebody really has they know if they have a startle response, and that means they jump with a loud noise, absent PTSD from being in the military. But the brain, as it develops, that primitive brain is active, and these are things to help the baby survive. Like the startle response is so that the baby contracts all of the muscles if they're being dropped. It's like a quarterback curling up in a ball instead of getting hit while he's back passing the football. There are others, the tonic neck reflex, that has to do with upright balance and other things. But these things can cause, if they're retained, they can cause anything from stuttering to attention problems. They can cause anxiety, a number of things, and people don't know where this comes from. Why do I do that? Why do I freeze in a stressful situation? Or why do I get up and walk away and say, I'm leaving, if I get upset when somebody says something I don't like? Those are from retained primitive reflexes. So we check for those. That's part of what we do here, primitive reflexes, and then we do the hemispheric exam. And then we also do autonomic balancing. I know you know what autonomic balancing is, right, Dr. Karlfeldt?
Yeah, we do that quite often.
I'm sure. But what we do is we find which part of that, either the fight or flight or the rest digest part of that nervous system, is not functioning. And there's a way of, with the laser, getting the neurons in the brain that govern that system. We get them more ATP, and then they can work, and we get that system back online.
That's exciting. And so with this technique, I mean, we've been talking about all these different dysfunctions, but you also have individuals that want to function better, meaning let's say you have an executive that wants to be able to perform better at his job. He may not be dealing with anxiety, depression, or OCD or so forth. He just wants to be able to maximize his ability to perform his tasks at work. Is something like this useful for that as well?
Yes, neurofeedback, there are several different types, and whether it's the traditional or what we call alpha theta training, most pro sports teams, the military, most music schools use alpha theta training to improve performance. It's the best, most effective treatment that nobody talks about because they don't want anybody to know what they're doing. But alpha theta training takes your brain into a meditative state. And you can go into a session with an intention for the first couple of minutes, basically you're painting the picture of what you want your brain to do. And then you just let it go. It takes you in the meditative state, and it connects the dots while you're there. You could go into the session and say, I want to be a powerful public speaker, and you envision that, and as if you meditated on it for years in a half-hour session. I had a singer use alpha-theta training for pitch control. We've had a wrestler at Meridian High here in Idaho use it for visualizing his wrestling moves, and all of a sudden he's a formidable power. It's an amazing therapy, and executives do that. CEOs will use it as well because it helps to get their brain, straight and functioning. But the going into it with an intention is powerful.
So you set the intention, and then during that, then you do this therapy. Is that like a neurofeedback as well?
It's a form of neurofeedback. Yes, it's done with tones, different tones, while it's measuring your alpha and theta waves, and it takes your brain into a state which is between awake and sleep. And that's where that all of the connecting of the dots occurs during that meditative state. And if you start to fall asleep, there's a little bell that kind of wakes you up a little bit to keep you from sleeping, guiding that brain into that state. It's very relaxing. It's very good for people who have a hard time falling asleep. Alpha theta. It's good for PTSD. Whereas another form of neurofeedback called sensory motor reflex is good for people who can't stay asleep. They'll go to sleep, they'll fall asleep fine, but then they'll wake up at 2 o'clock in the morning. And I just had somebody in here yesterday, and I said, I can tell by the looks of your map that you're not getting restorative sleep. And he said, well, I sleep, but then I wake up in the night, but I just have to go. I have to urinate. And I said, that tells me that you're not sleeping well, because your body's supposed to slow down your kidneys so it doesn't keep making urine, so that you don't have to get up and go. That's how I know you're not. That's it. You just confirmed what I saw on your brain map. So there are different forms of neurofeedback, and we do them all here, depending on what somebody has going on. There are things we look for on the brain map that say, man, this person's not sleeping well, or this person has anxiety, this high probability, this person has depression. And I want to say one word about depression. It's not just about sadness. Depression shows up as other things like passive-aggressive, really competitive, perfectionistic, in addition to, some people have that lack of joy.
And also, I mean, we're dealing also with a big issue, which are head traumas. I mean, you have all these high school athletes, and also most of us at some point have hit our head, and that can then have a huge impact on the functioning of the brain, and also then trigger a lot of these different emotions like anxiety, depression, or lack of memory. So is that something that neurofeedback can be beneficial?
Oh, very much so. We see that. I just had someone in here today. I was going over their report, head trauma, and on this one part of the map which deals with asymmetry, which we talked about earlier, where the beta is supposed to be more powerful on the left, alpha on the right. When someone has head trauma, almost always every one of our brain waves has more power on one side or the other, and it's all the same side. Now, if that happens if the power shifts over to the left side, that's head trauma with depression, because that means alpha is more powerful on the left. If it's if everything shifts to the right, that means their beta shifted to the right as well. That's head trauma with anxiety. So we do see that on the map, and then the protocols are designed to get the activity, we call it power. It's just a measurement of how many cells are working at one time. We do the protocols to help balance that brain out so that it just functions more closely within normal limits.
So that it's almost like then, because you have a kid playing football and they get hit in the head, it's almost like it'd be good to come in to check to make sure that things are functioning right after this head trauma, even though they may not feel a headache, or if it was a strong blow, it may be good just to double check. Right?
Absolutely. And I'll go one step further. If a child is going to start in a sport, you should have a baseline, because then you know where he came from. And if he gets hit and you're wondering, is he ready to go back? Is he this? What do I do as a parent? And the coach says he's okay, but I see him at home, he's not quite the same. Then you can do another brain map and then see what are the changes. We need to get that balance back. Has it started to go into that oxidative stress that causes it first anxiety and then depression? So it's good to do before, but definitely after somebody gets some kind of head trauma. And auto accidents as well.
Yeah, exactly. Even slow impact. I mean, we think that, that was just a little fender bender, but you don't recognize the impact that it can have on your brain.
Yes, in fact, I'll be looking at someone's brain map and I'll say, this shows right here that you've had some head trauma, and they look at me and they think it's hitting your head. And that's what confuses people. And then I show them the questionnaire on things like riding on a fast roller coaster. You just got your head whipped around. That can sometimes cause changes in the brain. Falling but not hitting, just your head gets whipped, or you get rear-ended maybe at 10 miles an hour and your head just kind of whips back. That can also cause shifts in the brain.
Yeah, so it's important to recognize. I mean, here you have the brain and this fluid and then this compartment, the skull, and any kind of jolting back and forth can create that trauma. So how would someone know that they need your help? I mean, what should they be looking for?
Well, usually if somebody has had a decrease in their joy, they just not very happy. I don't know why. I just have a flat. They call it a flat affect. I'm just not myself. I'm starting to feel anxiety when things used to not bother me. I call it the anxiety bucket filling up, and the different parts of the brain where we talked about that beta starts to creep over to the right side. That causes anxiety. It can cause high blood pressure. If they notice, man, my recall is not that great, or, I just can't focus like I used to. I don't know why. And I try to concentrate, and I need more coffee. I need some kind of stimulant. They're doing, those stimulant drinks, monster drinks to try to increase. The reason it feels better is that it increases their beta temporarily, which gives them more of the ability to focus, but they're contributing to the problem and perpetuating the problem and making it worse by doing that. Those are the types of things, especially the anxiety. That's where it starts. When you're under oxidative stress, feel more tired, and like I said, there are 8 phases to that oxidative stress. Each one causes a different shift that we look for in the brain map. And those phases, once you get down into the 6, 7, and 8, it takes longer to get that brain to go back. So I just tell people, don't wait. It's not super expensive to do a brain map, and if that's all you did, just to know, hey, that's why I do that, it's worth it.
Yeah, and it seems like an obvious screening tool that people should do on a fairly frequent basis. I mean, you go to the doctor and you get blood tests, at least annually. Right. And why shouldn't you want to check your brain?
Well, part of my passion, first of all, our passion here And we state it to every new patient. We say, our passion is to help you get the real you back. The real you does not include anxiety. That's not you. That's just, your brain isn't regulating itself. You aren't depressed. You aren't depression, I mean. You are a person who has this going on that causes these things, but then you start to be known as the person who's depressed. It's not your personality. But the other thing is, I want to get the word out so that people who are prescribing psychotropic drugs know which of those brainwaves are too high and which are too low, so that they'll be better able, if that's what they're going to do, they'll be better able to prescribe the proper medication for that person according to what their brain map says their brain is doing.
So even if you don't go through a series of neurofeedback sessions to correct your brain, just doing the brain map then will tell you what is too high, what is too low, and then you can then match that with the appropriate prescription medication.
Well, it's a lot tougher because they're more general. I have a list of them here in the office, and it says, these take this up and this down, or this one just takes that up. People who have abused amphetamines and marijuana over their life, I know specifically which part of their brain map is going to be altered. It's pretty specific, but those drugs are more general, but at least they'll have a good idea that a drug that they're prescribing is not going to cause severe side effects like suicidal or homicidal thoughts. Sorry, that one didn't work. We have to do that one.
Yeah, exactly. Well, Dr. Harmon, it's been such a pleasure having you on the show. And
thank you so much.
Well, it was really fun. And this is something that we're seeing more and more issues with the people around us, And I know we haven't even gone into dementia and Alzheimer's, all those things that also can strongly benefit from what you're doing. But
exactly.
Thank you so much. That is it for today.
Thank you so much for having me.
My pleasure. You're listening to HealthMade Radio. Remember to check us out at healthmade.co. Health is what you make it.